With the recent Alaska meeting and the Western temper tantrum over BRICS and trying to bust apart Russia again for like the third time in 100 years, the fight with BRICS had me going through some research materials. So I was working on a paper this morning on mobilization and the detriment of contrived consensus. Having gone through a few of these cycles at this point professionally, I'm beginning to see an event horizon, if you like. So I was just going through the history of some collapses, the long view cycles of empire, interest rates, and what that leads to, the current central bank circle jerk, the structural entanglements, the debt as motion, not stability, with global credit as the Ouroboros, and the current conditions, the near-term horizon, Europe being deindustrialized, China stalling, central banks being kind of boxed in, rate cuts to a losing effect, QT versus QE, and then QE turned into placebo, especially when it's used incorrectly as it has been. The macro cycle with regarding empire and interest rates, Sidney Homer showed that interest rates trace the rise and fall of empires, low rates in maturity with rising rates in periods of decay. We're firmly in the upward risk phase with uncertainty mounting. Rewards are demanded. The U.S. empire mirrors late Rome in this way. It's debt saturated, it's completely militarized, and its reliance on spectacle, dollar hegemony, financialization, rather than productive capacity. So the Kondratyev wave, the 50 or 60 year points, two late cycle downturns. If the last great surge was the neoliberal financialization wave of the 80s through 2000s, and this was my personal connection to this story, having grown up within those conditions, then the unwinding is happening right now of that financialization neoliberal push, synchronized with, along with other stresses and geopolitical fracture. The structural trap, debt as the perpetual motion machine. So the world is now carrying around 300 trillion in debt. That's triple of global GDP, which is kind of a useless measurement, but that's what everybody agrees on. This isn't just a number, it's the engine. Debt circulates like blood, from savers to borrowers and back in self-reinforcing loops. So the U.S. borrows from its own citizens, pensions, banks, insurance, the fire sector, taxes, on and on. Other nations do the same with their excess flowing back into U.S. treasuries. And this is what Janet Yellen and now Bessent were flying around the world, screaming at people to continue to buy U.S. treasuries. Old debt is rolled by issuing new debt. So this is Trump squeezing the Fed to lower rates again. They purposely set up a debt trap, that all this stuff has to be rolled over in the short term. So this is kind of what you see happening in the bond markets. This is not stability. It is a shark that must keep swimming. If the motion stops, the collapse begins. Greece in 2008 was kind of the preview. So it's going to be that, but systemic. The the event horizon economics, the present tense, this payback period is hitting Europe in the form of deindustrialization. United States is trying to onshore all that stuff, obviously. Uh, these artificial stimulus highs, the sugar highs, COVID recovery bursts, tariff distortions, the too big to fail uh, '08 model, they're kind of fading. Industrial production in Europe is rolling over sharply. Employment is stagnating, and the GDP is barely positive. Central banks know rate cuts don't work anymore. They are performance art to preserve psychological effects. QE has lost its mystique. Markets shrug at its mention. It's kind of been the only game in town, so it's become just the new normal. What remains is a narrative. We have tools, but the toolbox is empty. Thus, the ECB pauses at 2% to maintain an illusion of altitude. The Fed keeps talking data dependent while cornered by fiscal dominance. U.S. deficits at 25% of spending funded by debt. China is in similar straits. 19% of its spending is debt funded. The illusion is kind of cracking. Debt is no longer seen as a creative motion, but as a suffocating inertia. The horizon line and what comes next, most likely financial collapse as cyclical inevitability. The end phase of empire risk is here. The risk premiums, interests rise as systemic trust evaporates. Central banks are all kind of cornered. They're out of rates to cut. They're out of tricks to rebrand QE. You can expect new interventions, CBDCs, debt mutualization, debt jubilees disguised as innovation. The geopolitical outlets historically, the elite structures externalize collapse into war. This is the otherizing. It's always somebody else's fault. It's never the excesses of what's going on in your own countries. Stagnation plus over leverage generally equals the beat of the war drums. Fear will be manufactured to redirect blame. Cultural epoch shifts. Rudolf Steiner would say we are at the cusp of another epoch. The incorporated company once was the protagonist of materialistic civilization, is becoming antagonist. Finance itself is the panopticon. So the event horizon framing, the event horizon is where gravity bends light. You can see in, but nothing escapes out. Economically, we are here again. Debt and policy have curved space-time so tightly that every policy photon bends back inward. There's no true escape velocity exits from within the system. So the structural rupture, a collapse, a refoundation, or an emergent system to come outside the gravitational pull is the only thing that's going to be able to break free. So what I've been getting around to is the Great Depression was solved by another world war. Even after the first, the reparations were so bad, they basically knew it would lead to a hyperinflation and another world war. So the Elbridge Colby designs, or the American nationalist expansionist let's attack China plan, could include, it maybe even already has included, causing a global Great Depression to starve China of its vacuuming in of capital and material to keep its productive gears from turning. The point being, there has to be some synergy between the contrived fight between the current global powers. The United States has reached some pretty serious bottlenecks in producing the muscle and the armaments, if you like, to keep some of these mafia type rackets flowing. They're running out of weapons that are overpriced and don't work very well anyway. So it's going to be very interesting to see how that plays out, with their only advantage really being in the satellites and the all-seeing eye and the spying and eventually nuclear weapons. So that doesn't benefit anyone having supremacy there. There's too much cooperation at the level of banks, bondholders, and the material inputs, including labor. No one in the West is really talking about Africa right now, which means there's probably a lot of games being played in Africa about how everyone is going to decide that how that gets developed and what blocks they operate under. What's happening in Burkina Faso and Ibrahim Traore and the Russians and the Chinese having the advantage of actually building infrastructure and not having a colonial legacy, I think gives them a real head and shoulders advantage over anything that the Five Eyes and the collective West have to offer. I do not think average citizens in the entirety of the West are going to be able to stop the inertia from happening. The divisions of labor and the chopping up into blocks of resource flows require the planning of tax regimes, banking models, private bondholders, and of course, the global legal structures that actually carry weight. The Western old money and old bloodline blocks have completely infiltrated and usurped international law and institutions. This is why everybody's constantly talking about the rules-based order. This is the usurping of already established international law. The global South cannot pay its debt. So whoever is trapped in the City of London British ISDS model is trapped unless they purposely default. This is going to require the BRICS and other bilateral deals to provide at the institutional level the ability to rip the Band-Aid off and get out of the Western Roman oligarch bondholder model, where freedom means for the bondholder to make debt sacrosanct and enslave the debtors. All this to say, the American industrial model that the Chinese and Russians, to a certain extent, are currently using really matters. The way banking and credit was used to industrialize and develop the United States really matter. This is to say, post-orthodox or heterodox economists are more relevant now than since the Industrial Revolution. And it's kind of funny to even have to phrase it that way in the United States, because these are really just classical economists, and especially in the American tradition, that have solutions that work. Thinking of Thorstein Veblen and the work of Michael Hudson and Richard Werner is relevant in the realm of QE. When the economic engine stalls, the imperial class reaches for the oldest accelerator, generally, which is war. The resolution for the Great Depression was through World War II. It wasn't some magic productivity. It was total war credit mobilization that finally blasted idle capacity into use. Today's choreography is more refined. Weaponized demand destruction, liquidity squeezes, export controls, maritime insurance shocks, what they call the shadow fleet, sanctions layering, starve your rivals' cash and credit lungs and call it security. The China-Africa read tracks, there's too much quiet alignment at the level of banks, bondholders, shipping, and inputs for this to be a purely ideological fight. Africa is the swing theater because whoever writes the credit for roads, ports, power writes the future cash flows. The ISDS model of the City of London choke collar, once you're in, you don't grow. You pledge fealty, default. You can either default and re-platform or drown. This is where Werner comes into play. If you want a peacetime mobilization alternative to the war solution, which, brings the Alaska meeting to the fore, it's very easy to make fun of Donald Trump and the current puppets that have been in power in the United States for so long. I mean, that's not a difficult thing to do. But the reason that it matters that the United States and Russia is speaking at that level is because no one should have any interest in this escalating into a nuclear exchange or the West not taking its foot off the gas of trying to break Russia apart again, 1991 Larry Summers style, just to prop up BlackRock and Larry Fink and other American financial interests for a debt revaluation. So, Werner's usable core is that banks don't lend out savings. They create new money with each loan. So the purpose of credit is decisive. You can create credit for asset purchases, which will create asset inflation and inevitable banking crises. You can do credit for consumption, which will lead to CPI inflation, or you can have credit for productive GDP transactions, or even more importantly, PPP transactions. So small to medium firm engagement for capital expenditure, working capital for goods and services, real growth without the inflation. That's the lever the war party abuses all the time, but with bombs. Werner uses it with banks. If you target creation toward production, you get the World War II mobilization effects without the body count of everyone having to go to war with each other. Mark Blythe at the Watson Institute at Brown, he lays out the case for how harmful the fake neuralgia of debt is and why the aspirin of austerity makes absolutely no sense, especially if you're going to purport caring at all about the debt. The solution is not to pull a global Greece, but to pay off the debt through real growth. And not letting Larry Fink World War III everyone into a hedge fund revaluation by collateralizing the entire solar system. A non-war mobilization package at a national scale, it could look like credit guidance, qualitative, not just quantity. Regulators impose binding targets and risk weights that force bank credit toward productive small and medium enterprises. logistics, energy buildouts, machine tools, things that are healthy. Kind of the Japanese and Germany post-war growth playbook, minus the bubble tail risk. You license a lot more local and regional banks. There's so much focus on the big, the JP Morgans of the world and the large banks. I don't think most Americans realize this franchising of banking, this monopolization, if you will, how many banks have been eliminated. The de-banking has been very real. So license more local and regional banks, debt networks of community banks with place-based mandates, kind of the house bank model. Their advantage is informational, allocating to real firms instead of playing the balance sheet games. Development banks plus a refinancing window. A national development bank could buy and discount vetted productive loans from commercial banks, replenishing their balance sheets so they keep originating the right credit. You could have targeted reserves and guaranteed schemes. The government guarantees limited first loss tranches for specific productive loans, tooling, power, water, rail, whatever your local community decides that it's missing, that's to its long-term benefit, that matches the education and talent in the area or creates new productivity there. You could have payments and procurement as the cudgel. So you could pay really fast and buy domestic where feasible and use multi-year offtakes to collapse risk premia for new factories. You could have capital flow as hygiene temporary measures to stop hot money whiplash while you re-aim credit, taxes on short-term inflows, prudential foreign exchange rules, so on, and lift as domestic cash flows stabilize. So the current ham-fisted approach of trying to bully everyone while onshoring anything. So you need a collapse in the dollar, which is going to just offshore capital very quickly. Money isn't patriotic. No one has any reason to keep their money in the United States right now. The get out of London pathways, legal exit ramps. There's going to have to be some kind of legislation to sunset ISDS exposure, whether that looks like new treaties, carve-outs, withdrawal pathways, while you stand up reciprocal arbitration. BRICS is going to have to figure out at the institutional level where are the next courts going to come from for productive foreign direct investment. The NAFTA deindustrialization in the 90s, you had a flood of European engineers come to Detroit and the other Rust Belt manufacturing cities, and they're kind of running that playbook again. So what's the BRICS clearing and the bilateral nets? The oils, minerals for infrastructure, swaps, local currency settlement, regional clearing unions to keep the account pressures tolerable while exports mature. There are less and less nations interested in the American Carlyle model, where nothing ever actually gets built. All this IMF debt essentially just works as infrastructure for foreign extraction and for local oligarchies. Commodity-backed credit lines, not as a peg. Pledging future offtake into state development facility that on-lends only to PPP positive projects, audited by third-party engineering, not by a bond desk clergy. You could local banking density, charter provincial community banks with very narrow mandates. What do those infrastructure projects look like in micro communities? You could tie them to the development bank window that are tied to milestone verifications. Werner's who gets credit and for what being the game there. U.S. workers and towns, so equilibrium at a human scale, public and municipal banks, community development financial institutions, CDFIs 2.0, give them a preferential refi line if their book is productive loans, an RFC style procurement rails, federal state offtakes for grid hardware, transformers, rail components, energy, all of these long-term things that are currently falling apart and need to be upgraded or created whole cloth at this point. You could create a mortgage firewall, materially higher risk weights for investor mortgages and cash out refis, lower weights for first-time owner-occupied, and only if it's paired with local productive payroll share. This keeps housing from cannibalizing industry. Industrial mutuals and employee buyouts, you could guarantee slices of loans when workers buy and operate firms, especially if they're just going to file bankruptcy or get reabsorbed, or the Mitt Romney model, where you just chop everything up and sell it off. So what this does to the war logic is you can have a total war-like mobilization. It's just directed credit with propaganda. That's all really the war model is directed credit, but with, hey, everybody, let's go murder the bad guy that did all this evil stuff to us. Werner gives you directed credit without the mass graves. If you stand up a credible audited pipeline of productive loans and starve the asset churn, the need for war as macro reset loses its oxygen. And you also blunt against any Great Depression for China, which should really equal Great Depression for the world. That gambit, the counter is that credit builds exports and domestic supply rather than house prices. So, if you were to advise a mid-sized sovereign, you could pass a credit allocation act, have legal mandates for annual sectoral credit shares, and publish bank-by-bank scorecards. You could capitalize development banks and open a productive refi window with clear eligibility, CapEx, export logistics, energy, ag processing, on and on. You could charter 50 local banks with narrow audited missions, staff it with engineers, not just MBAs, issue procurement calendars, 5-year for grids, rail, water, link, whatever is pre-approved loan templates for each community. You could table an ISDS escape bill and sign BRICS or bilateral clearing MOUs to keep foreign investment stable during the pivot. You could impose risk weight guarantee schedules that makes it uneconomic to book speculative assets and attractive to book real production again. So Richard Werner presents relevant solutions in a climate like this. Whether everyone is going to catch up fast enough, and even if they do, the current bondholders in this hot money financialized model, they're deeply interested in just doubling down and seeing that all the way through. And it's more likely that they'll have us all kill each other before admitting that their software is was harmful and wrong, and they knew it was going to get to this point. So Warner reframing monetary policy as credit purpose policy, I think is going to be really control a lot of these conversations around sovereignty and what that means, even at the individual level. So if we control what gets financed, we control what gets built, and whether we arrive at a true reindustrialization or if we arrive at a forced mobilization for conflict. So that's kind of the thoughts this morning, and it's clear that this is likely to turn into a serialized release.